In the beginning, darkness was on the face of the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And God created creatures of every kind. But humanity has exploited his creation in the name of the almighty dollar. Until today, thousands of species are on the brink of extinction. But there are those who are acting to save endangered species before it's too late.
The cheetah is an international symbol of the fight to save endangered species. Despite a major international effort, it's still heading towards extinction. This cheetah's home is the Amboseli National Park in Kenya, surely one of the wonders of the natural world. People come from all over the world to enjoy these sights, to be at one with Africa's incredible wildlife in its natural habitat. Unfortunately, at Amboseli, nestling at the foot of Africa's highest mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, a problem has developed which potentially threatens both the wildlife and its habitat. The wind which blows through Amboseli, the local Maasai people call the devil wind. It picks up any topsoil there is and simply blows it away. One of the main reasons this happens is a high concentration of elephants. Some years ago, the Kenyan government took a major conservation step by outlawing the ivory trade. No one foresaw the consequences. Ironically, the protection afforded the majestic elephant by the ban now threatens the habitat essential to all life in the park.
Within the Amboseli ecosystem, the park is the only watering point. All the watering points actually are sealed within the park. And elephants come and drink water during the day, and they move out perhaps during the night.
Over a matter of decades, poachers reduced the number of elephants from tens of thousands to just a few hundred. Following the banning of the ivory trade, the highly intelligent elephants quickly recognized Amboseli as a daytime refuge and invaded the park by the hundreds from neighboring Tanzania.
They find the park to be a secure place. For security reasons, they move into the park and stay until maybe evening hours. They go outside.
When the migration began, Amboseli was thick with beautiful acacia trees. In their search for food, the elephants have decimated the park. It is quickly becoming a massive dust bowl. And there is another irony. The tourists who have replaced the hunters add to the dust problem, especially with off-road driving. There is also increasing salinity. Recently, the water table has risen to such a level it's bringing to the surface deadly salts, which kill off remaining vegetation. This, combined with the elephant and tourist problems, means the resulting habitat degradation is potentially catastrophic. But the fight is on to save Amboseli and its precious wildlife. Now the threat from poachers has diminished, the Kenyan Wildlife Service is actively seeking ways of encouraging elephants to stay outside the park. This, however, presents its own problems. The local community sees elephants as a threat to their crops. So the Wildlife Service is exploring ways to reduce this potential conflict.
At the moment, we are sharing the revenue we collect from the gates. They are getting 25% of what we get from our entrance gates. The revenue collected from Amboseli, we give to the community to start their own projects of their own choice without our say over them.
In return for their share of the tourist dollar, the local tribespeople will allow the elephants to graze their land. But you don't have to be a major institution or government agency to help save endangered species. An international tour operator has come up with an even more ambitious plan to save the Amboseli National Park. They will harness the energy of the caring eco-tourists they bring to Amboseli. Each will plant their own acacia tree. The goal is at least 1 million trees. The trees will act as a windbreak, thereby eliminating the dust bowl and restoring Amboseli to its former splendor. The project is now up and running. At an inaugural tree planting ceremony, the local Maasai people came together with a group of eco-tourists to celebrate a new beginning for Amboseli.
And when I say 1 million trees in 50 years, that's our first target. But I know in less than that time, around 30 years, we'll be aiming for the second million. And we've already seen what it's done to Amboseli in the short period of 18 months. It has brought back the wildlife, the bird life. It's unbelievable, the number of birds. When you got more flamingos here than you have at Lake Nakuru, that itself is proof of what it's done. And without trees, nothing else survives. We need people to love trees, to understand that tree has life. Very few of us understand that every tree has the same life and the lifespan that we have. And that's what we need, an understanding. And more people to give. We are giving back what we've taken from this country, basically.
Across the Indian Ocean, just over 1,000 miles east of Amboseli, lies the archipelago that is the Republic of the Seychelles. Surely one of the most romantic places on the face of the planet. Comprising some 115 islands, this tropical paradise was totally uninhabited until just over 200 years ago. Taken over from the French by the British in 1814, the Republic gained its independence in 1976. This tiny nation of just 70,000 people, the Seychellois, were ahead of their time in appreciating the value of their natural heritage.
As most people know, conservation in Seychelles has a long history, which started in the 1960s with a group of Seychellois and some foreign scientists getting together and telling the world about the great and beautiful things in Seychelles. And it was in 1971 that the government released the first conservation strategy in Seychelles. And that was the first conservation strategy in Africa and in the Western Indian Ocean region as well.
One of the great and beautiful things in the Seychelles is the magical Valley de Mai on Praslin Island. The valley is steamy, lush, almost primeval in its beauty. So beautiful, in fact, that in 1881, British General Warden of Khartoum became obsessed with the place. He not only believed it was the Garden of Eden, he tried his hardest to prove it. There is a tree in the Valley de Mai he believed was the biblical tree of knowledge. Eating its fruit caused Adam and Eve to be banished from the garden. The tree is called the Coco De Mar, itself one of the most endangered in the world. It once covered almost the whole of the island. It's the tree's fruit with its erotic shape, which was its downfall. The nuts were highly prized when found washed up on Indian Ocean shorelines, and in the 13th century were worth as much as 4,000 gold florins. No one knew where they were coming from. When their location in the Seychelles was finally discovered, most of the forests were razed to the ground in an attempt to maintain their value. The resemblance to the human body is also present in the male tree. Its catkin has a similarity to the human male sex organ. There's no wonder this exotic and intriguing tree, some of which live for over 1,000 years, has its own legend. It's said that by the light of a full moon, the male tree uproots itself and makes its way across to the female to make love to her. However, the legend also says anyone who witnesses this amorous encounter won't live to tell the tale. The Seychelles' remoteness makes it an ideal holiday destination for the rich and famous. Seychellois staple diet is fish, rice and fruit. They also consider turtle meat a delicacy. Local artisans ensure nothing is wasted.
Here in the Seychelles, we have a problem with overexploited resources like turtles, where in the past, in the last 100 years or so, this very rare animal has become rarer because people have not understood its life cycle. People have treated it as a fish. Whereas it's a reptile, it takes 60 years for them to grow to sexual maturity, and it's very easy to exploit them. It's a worldwide problem. It's worse than the African elephant problem. They have managed to conserve the elephant to such an extent that the populations now have risen to relatively sustainable levels. Whereas nobody in the world has been able to manage sea turtles sustainably. We do have the problem with poaching, and the only way to solve it, we have found, it cannot be with laws. You have to have education, you have to have awareness programs, and you have to have grassroots involvement. It's extremely important. We are working with the World Bank on an integrated project to try and look at the problem in a holistic fashion. The project will look at the artisans who depend on the turtle shell. The project will compensate the artisans for not working in the shell. It will also retrain the artisans into using alternative type of materials. And then along with that, there will be biological studies, there will be education projects. And at the end of all that, there will be a law banning all sale of turtle shell products. So in the last 20 years, we've had a lot of studies, a lot of research on the rare birds, the rare fish, the wildlife of Seychelles. But very little has been done to build up the indigenous capacity of the Seychelles to conserve what we have. And it's only 2 years ago when the government created Conservation and National Park Service that we started to look at this problem. Because conservation basically has been the prerogative of foreigners in this country. And it's only now that we started to train a small group of dedicated conservation managers.
The training program that I'm involved in is part of the environmental management plan for Seychelles. And it's really aimed at the workers in the field, the rangers in particular, in the marine parks and in the terrestrial sites in Seychelles.
One of the places the Rangers police is the St Anne Marine Park. With the growing number of tourists, the park is under increasing pressure.
The St Anne Marine Park was the first marine park in the whole Indian Ocean. The training program has mostly been involved in this coral reef monitoring. The state of the marine parks was never really measured right at the beginning when the marine parks were declared. St Anne Marine Park has a very high volume of tourists, and it's very near to the port, so it has pollution problems, it has anchors being dropped, it has tourists snorkeling and touching the coral with their fins, that sort of thing. So we have to get a baseline of how good the coral is. And the way we've been doing that is really very much like you would monitor birds. It's very similar. You just look at the fish varieties that are there, and they tell you how good a habitat it is. And the more fish, basically, the better the coral reef. So with the rangers, we've been looking at learning 4 or 5 groups of fish, learning to identify all the species, learning the coral growth types, establishing what percentage cover there is, how much of it there is, and then tabulating all that underwater.
But the battle to save endangered wildlife is not confined to turtles, corals, and erotic palms.
The Seychelles has the dubious distinction of having some of the rarest birds in the world. Now, I say dubious because we often advertise to the world that we have rare birds here. But rare birds means problems. Rare birds mean that many of them are probably on the road to extinction. Now, we have had some successes with conservation. The brush warbler of Cousin Island is one. Now, in the 1960s, ornithologists discovered that on Cousin Island, a very small granitic island near Pralin, the brush warbler was almost extinct. There were only about 20 to 25 of these birds left, and that was the only part of the world where they were.
Cousin Island is owned and managed by the International Council for Bird Preservation, now called BirdLife International. Saving the brush warbler involved a habitat reinstatement program that replaced introduced coconuts with endemic vegetation. This allowed the birds to recolonize the island, and its numbers soared to over 400. Surely one of the most successful recovery programs for a bird anywhere in the world. The fantastic success the Seychellois have had in saving the brush warbler is partly due to the island being kept free of feral animals. Cousin is one of the few places in the world where there are no rats nor cats. The birds on Cousin feel so secure, many nest on the ground and have no fear of people. This fluffy little fellow is a baby tropic bird. Its mother, knowing her young one is safe, has flown off to get it some lunch. The reason why this island has never been invaded by predators like rats is simple. There has never been a pier for boats to moor against, and despite the growing number of tourists and bird lovers visiting the island, that will never change. The tourists are carefully supervised by a dedicated group of Seychelles wild rangers who live on the island.
Bon, alors on commence avec les Français d'abord, comme l'habitude. So these birds will leave us and they hang on the ocean. They stay within the Indian Ocean. Don't move elsewhere unless the wind will blow them into land. That's very seldom. So there you go. Since this morning, they're actually active with the nest building. Right? They're a bit late because of weather.
The rangers' work is not only supervising tourists, they also monitor and preserve all aspects of the island's ecosystem.
We Seychelles, we've been involved every time in this, conservation. And we are here like really naturalists. I mean, it's commitment really to, you have to make to live here. So we like it ever so much. And we have a total of us working here. And plus a lad who's got his wife and the kids, 7.25 people living here. I mean, tourists, they can see our, what you call seriousness when you come here. And they say, oh, this place we can't go left or right. I have to stick with those guys. I mean, and then I would tell them how restriction, that you stay with your guide on the path, that kind of things, don't, take anything dead or alive. And they know, they can see the expression on our face,
On the island of Fregat, another important conservation war is being waged. The man leading the struggle lives the life of a hermit. From Scotland, Neil McCulloch's world is like no other. He lives in a Tolkien-esque environment, populated by bizarre, larger-than-life creatures and vegetation. It really is like something out of a fairy tale. The island is home to the giant tenebronid beetle. Itself endangered, it's found nowhere else. Also unique to Fregat is the world's longest millipede. Perhaps the most fantastic of all is the giant Aldabran tortoise. These were once widespread on Indian Ocean islands, but like the dodo of Mauritius, they were nearly eaten to extinction. Today, this endangered species, which lives for hundreds of years, can only be found on a handful of islands in the Seychelles. But Neil's mission in life is to save another of the world's critically endangered birds. It's the Seychelles magpie robin, and there are only 30 individuals left in existence. These three are 10% of the whole population, the equivalent, if you like, of 500 million people.
Well, the Seychelles magpie robin was probably once widely distributed in the central Seychelles. Over the past 150 years, it has declined dramatically to the point where it is now one of the rarest birds in the world. At the moment, there are only 30 magpie robins in existence. The main problem has been the introduction of mammalian predators, principally rats and cats. Since the human colonization of the Seychelles, vegetation has changed dramatically on many of the islands. For instance, here on Fregat, although it looks very nice, natural island, the vegetation is 95% non-native. So we have a totally artificial situation here. So the feeding conditions for the magpie robins in this introduced woodland is relatively poor. Now, the robins can survive without the native forest as long as there is either bare earth or very short vegetation in which they can feed. In the late 70s, there were 40 birds here. By the mid-80s, it was down to 20. This is mainly attributable to this loss of feeding habitat. The establishment of new native woodland is obviously going to take time. It involves removal of the undergrowth from the existing forest and replanting with native tree species, and also planting new areas of forest. So in the short term, we are providing birds with supplementary food. This, to some degree, overcomes the problem of the lack of feeding habitat. Now, we're not trying to give them the full dietary requirement. We don't want the birds to become dependent on us for all their food. We want to keep them foraging naturally, behaving as naturally as possible. And we found that cockroaches have been a very useful supplement to their diet. We can catch them easily enough, and they've got pretty high nutritive value. It's also very similar to their natural food. Just in the last 6 months, since we've intensified the supplementary feeding, we've had tremendous breeding success. The population has gone up from 25 to 30. The supplementary feeding is allowing birds to breed more often. It's improving the survival of the young birds. We hope that certainly within the next 18 months we'd be getting fairly close to that original figure of 40.
2 of the male robins have been moved to nearby Arid Island. Initially, it was an emergency operation. There was an excess of male birds on Fregat, and territorial fighting was endangering the young. The long-term plan is to move females to join the exiled males and establish a new breeding colony. In the meantime, the situation on Fregat is extremely precarious. One serious fire, storm, or outbreak of a disease, and these beautiful birds could be lost forever. A woodland bird that is doing much better is the verve, or black paradise flycatcher. Perhaps the most beautiful of all the Seychelles' rare bird life, the paradise flycatcher is now restricted to the tiny island of Ladigue. Ladigue is thought by many to be the world's most beautiful island, and there is enormous pressure for tourist development. The black paradise flycatcher relies on the woodland and marshes of Ladigue for its food source. The loss of the trees and wetlands to development was a major factor in the reduction of numbers. There are only about 70 of these beautiful birds left. A reserve was established to act as a core breeding area, and now the flycatcher is spreading across the whole plateau of the island. A government visitors centre helps to raise local awareness and pride in the bird that has become a symbol for the island. Part of the Seychelles conservation strategy is to allow their endangered birds to recover in their natural habitat. As with Kuzan and the brush warbler, here on Ladigue, Seychellois rangers monitor the bird's progress. The name verve is French for widow, and it takes its name from the male of the species. This is the female. Only the blue rim around the eyes is common to both the male and female. While it is a relatively common sight flying around the reserve area, the male has never before been filmed at the nest. The Seychellois are rightly proud of their conservation achievements.
I think we have something to learn from the rest of the world. But what the world can learn from us is this kind of stewardship of our environment. We have been close to our environment, unlike an urban dweller in New York or London or Paris. The environment is very close to the Seychellois. All people in Seychelles live next to a tree, next to the sea, to a river. So I think this kind of closeness to nature is something that has to be learned by the rest of the world.
Although the Seychelles is one of the world's smallest nations, its fight to bring its endemic species back from the brink of eternity should be an inspiration to conservationists the world over. Due south of the Seychelles is another island paradise called Mauritius. It was totally uninhabited until nearly 400 years ago. Its greatest claim to fame is probably the extinct dodo bird. The Mauritians refer to their island as the jewel of the Indian Ocean. Its golden beaches, deluxe hotels, and stunning scenery make it an ideal tourist destination. The Mauritian economy is based on sugarcane. British and French colonists covered the island with the plantations. This has resulted in the decimation of almost all of the island's endemic plant and animal life. As a result of the loss of its natural habitat, Mauritius is now home to the rarest plants and wildlife in the world.
Black River Gorges, they're the only really wild area that we have left on this island. When man first came to Mauritius, nearly 400 years ago, the whole island was covered by luxuriant tropical vegetation. But regrettably, most of it is gone. It has been destroyed for agriculture and for urbanization. And so today, only a tiny, tiny percentage of the island has pristine forest, perhaps only 1%. And most of it is centered around this complex of gorges, an area of only about 50 square kilometers. And it is here we have the world's rarest wildlife, the rarest plants, the rarest birds, the rarest reptiles, and a very, very rare species of fruit bat. So it's a very, very important place. In fact, it's a real paradise for somebody who's interested in endangered species. But what you've got to realize, these are only remnants of what was once a totally remarkable ecosystem. The dodo, which has become a symbol of extinction, disappeared from Mauritius in the 1660s. So you could say that Mauritius has a very special place in human consciousness. It was here that mankind first realized that the wildlife of this world is exhaustible. Up until then, people thought that when something disappeared, it was just around the corner or maybe in another country. But it was on Mauritius we realized what damage we could do to the earth. You can say, quite realistically, that it's here on Mauritius we had the dawning of modern conservation consciousness. And today, we're actually using conservation resources to pull back from the very precipice of extinction some of the world's most endangered species.
15 years ago, Carl Jones was sent to Mauritius to close down the project to save the Mauritius Kestrel. Even the World Wildlife Fund had lost hope, but Carl refused to give up on it, and he's still in Mauritius today.
Just 20 years ago, this was the world's rarest bird, when there was only 4 individuals left in the wild. Many people thought it was doomed to extinction. But thanks to captive breeding, we've been able to restore the species in the wild. In total, we've released 284 birds, and from those released birds, we now have 50 to 55 pairs breeding in the wild. We only need to release kestrels for 1 more season before we'll be able to leave them recover on their own. This has been a wonderful conservation exercise, but it's been a lot more than that, because these birds are my friends and I've got to know them personally. And some of them are very friendly. Come on. Come on. Good girl. And the nice thing about that kestrel is that I've known it since it was an egg. But not only that, I knew its parents and I also knew its grandparents. So I've been able to follow a lot of these birds through as if they're my own children.
Using the dodo as its symbol, Gerald Durrell's Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust has been a major supporter of the Mauritians' fight to save its wildlife.
We will never be able to get Mauritius back to as it was before man. But, I mean, my belief is that we're talking about the heritage of the Mauritian people. We are there helping them do the very best we can with what's left. One of the different things about all of our projects is that they're all done in partnership with the government of that country. It involves our training program, it involves our staff going overseas.
And the training program's very first graduate was a Mauritian.
I followed a course of 10 months in Jersey. There, it was a very enriching course where I worked in the different sections of reptiles, birds, and mammals. And of course, special attention were given to species which are present in Mauritius and which Jersey were breeding successfully.
The likely problems that can occur.
After studying in Jersey, Canadian university student Monica Robbie is doing her field training in Mauritius. One of the animals she's working with is the Rodrigues fruit bat. This bat has been saved from extinction by a captive breeding program at the Mauritian government's captive breeding centre in Black River. However, this type of success can only be achieved with collaboration between governments and international organisations like the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust. One of the major successes has been the pink pigeon. Once down to just 12 individuals, it's now on the road to recovery.
The pink pigeon, I've been working with the pink pigeon since 1976, and I'm quite convinced it's hell-bent on its own extinction. If you give a pink pigeon a decision to make, it'll make the wrong one every single time. Bet money on it. Incompatibility of pairs. We had one female. We tried her on 17 different occasions with a partner before she would accept it. The problem is in the forest, pink pigeons fly around and pick each other. We look in the stud book and say, oh, well, this one ought to be mated with that one now because we're worried about the gene lines, etc., etc.
When you think of how rare these animals are, you can't get lots of good scientific data overnight, and in fact, it'll take you 20 or 30 years. So if you're saying, well, we can't really start our conservation until we understand about the biology of the birds, you're never going to start because they're going to become extinct before you actually start your conservation. So you have to start with a feel for them, with intuition. So we have a team of very good biologists who live with the animals, and the animals become their friends. So they understand what's going wrong with them. They understand them intuitively. With the pink pigeon, this has worked very well. We've bred a large number in captivity, and we've been releasing them into the wild. They're now beginning to breed. We've had problems in that a number of the youngsters have died or haven't made it, or a lot of the nests have failed. But we're beginning to understand what's going wrong with that species, and we are killing predators. We're killing cats, rats, keeping monkeys away from nests.
These monkeys are crab-eating macaques. Introduced from Asia, they may look cute, but they steal the birds' precious eggs. Monkeys aren't the only problem. Like so many other places in the world, feral cats are a major predator, as are introduced mongooses.
This morning. Got a cat.
But you're excited about that? Wow.
Big male.
Is that the one you think that's been killing the pigeons?
Maybe. Well, we got the female a few months ago.
Yeah.
So,
Good lord.
Been trying to get in for months,
And you got some mongooses? Yeah. Right.
This cat was trapped by the Mauritian Wildlife Appeal Fund workers. A controversial step, but if endemic species are to be brought back from the brink of eternity, then introduced animals have to be exterminated, or at the very least, controlled. It's this aspect of endangered species management Monica and other would-be conservationists have to come to terms with. Not only destroying feral animals, but dissecting them to see what damage they've done.
If we're ever going to understand the problems the pink pigeons have, we've got to understand the predators. We've got to understand the enemy. Okay. Stomach's actually quite full, the stomach. Great. You never know what you're going to find. Okay, now what I'll do is I'm going to wash these contents, and I'll come back and put them in that bowl. Great. Wow, look at that. We've got all sorts of things in here. You can see there's lots of spines here. This is a tenrec. These are introduced mammals that come from Madagascar. They're fairly common in the forest. Ah, there you are. There's its foot there. It's a bit like opening presents on Christmas Day. Don't know quite what you're going to get. Good, this is a nice healthy animal, isn't it? Okay, here it goes. This is really interesting because we've got lots of bird bits in here. So it seems likely that this cat is one of the ones that's been causing all the problems eating the pink pigeons in the pigeon wood. So it's good we got him. But we've lost about a dozen pigeons in the last year, and that's something like a third of the wild population. So it's a hell of a lot of birds have disappeared.
But their work isn't confined to the eradication of feral animals. As important is education. This is the heart of the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust's philosophy. Schools are encouraged to adopt the birds, and here high school teachers have come to the Pink Pigeon Sanctuary to learn about the project.
And this platform here is used to feed the pigeons all year round, but especially at this time of year, in the dry season, because there's less food in the forest, and the pigeons will come in. You can see we've actually got 3 there. These are birds that have been reared down in Black River, at our aviaries in Black River, and they're brought up here to the Mackay Forest, and they'll pair up and start breeding.
The teachers are told how the nests are monitored. The infertile eggs are removed for analysis with the hope the birds will lay again. The Mauritian Wildlife Appeal Fund realises the importance of teaching young people about the environment. After all, the world's future lies in the decisions they'll make when they grow up. Here they're taking the same teachers, this time with their students, on a field trip to the Elusive Nature Reserve.
If you look up in the tree here, you can see there's a Mauritius Kestrel. This bird was actually bred in America, at Boise, Idaho, and it's been brought over to Mauritius and released on Îles Aigrettes. Now, we've been doing this for a number of years, and some of the birds stay on the island, but the others fly across to the mainland. But this one has stayed. It's a female, and she lives actually in this nest box here, which we've put up for her. And this is the box that you sponsored, your school. Responsible for buying this box, and you put it up in this tree. The kestrel seems to be pretty at home in there.
The children are told the island is also home to some of the world's rarest plants. However, the island is being choked by introduced acacia trees. Ironically, while they're planting them in the Amboseli National Park in Kenya, here they are eradicating them, giving the rare native bush a chance to recover.
We're going to take these weeds out from around this Bois Chandelle. Now this tree is endangered, which means it's threatened with extinction, and its last real population is on this island and a few other areas on the mainland of Mauritius. So once we remove these weeds, then we can allow the seedlings to grow through and increase the population. Okay, so that's it. And you just take the weeds like this.
While the battle in the field is being fought, rare plants are being cultivated in the government nurseries, ready for reintroduction. But it's not good news for all of the endangered plants of Mauritius. This is the most endangered tree in the world. It's the only one of its kind left.
If there's a plant which is the most endangered in the wild, it's certainly the Hyophobia miraculous. This tree, which is down to the last individual of that species. Across the ages, people have systematically been cutting it down to eat the heart of that palm, such that now this population has been decimated there. And the last one which remains is this tree found in the botanical gardens, Kipkeu. It's extremely hard to try and cultivate it. All efforts that have been done to save these palms from going extinct has failed. The principal reason is that it produces fruits and the seeds which are infertile. We have been able to produce young seedlings in vitro in test tubes, but unfortunately the plants are quite weak, and when they are transplanted back into normal soil, they all have failed. But the hope is still there. We still need to try and continue our efforts to save this palm from going extinct.
Mauritius not only has the rarest tree in the world, it is home to arguably the world's rarest bird. Of the 15 left in existence, only 5 are female. It's the Echo Parakeet, and this pair are the first to be filmed together in the wild. The female is the one on the right.
The Echo Parakeet is the most endangered, but it's also the one that we've done the least amount of work on. We've been feeding the birds to make sure that they got enough food, and we've been learning the techniques of how to manage wild parrots. It's actually a very interesting bird. It's the last parrot left in Mauritius, and we think there were at least 4 species here originally. And it's the last of a group of parakeets that were found on all the Indian Ocean islands. They were found on Seychelles, Rodrigues, Réunion, and Mauritius has the last population of these psittacular parakeets. When we first discovered that it was critically endangered and was down to just single individuals in the wild, we said, well, what can we do about it? Most conservationists said, give up. You know, it's not worth working with it. The resources just don't exist. We've discovered that we can actually increase their productivity in the wild by harvesting first clutches of eggs. They lay another clutch of eggs, and we can raise the first lot in captivity. And we have reared several in captivity very successfully, rearing them under foster ring-necked parakeets. Regrettably, they're not as easy to keep as most other species of parakeets. These are critically endangered birds with lots and lots of problems. And some of the birds have actually been dying in captivity. This is a great tragedy. What on earth do? You've got the world's rarest parrot, you're doing all you can for it, you put them in cages, some of them die. But, you know, we've got to stay with it. You've got to realize that when you are working with species that you know very little about their biology, these are the first ones ever to be brought into captivity. Of course you're going to make mistakes. Of course some of them aren't going to make it. But you've got to learn from those mistakes, and we've got to get our act together. The birds that have died in captivity have been surplus to requirements in the wild. They've been from harvested eggs, or in a few cases, the birds we've rescued from failing nests. So these are our experimental material. We shouldn't be experimenting at the last minute, but we've got no option. It's really a myth when people say you need millions of pounds to save endangered species. That's totally wrong. A lot can actually be done with rather modest amounts of money, but the most important thing that's required is enthusiastic and competent staff and continuity. If anybody thinks they can save an endangered species in just 3 or 4 years, they're kidding. You know, the only way to do it is a long-term commitment, because when you actually start with a species, you don't know what the problems are going to be. With the kestrel, we're now nearly finished working with that species, but it's taken 20 years. We're starting with the Echo Parakeet, and I think we'll probably still be working at it in 50 years' time. But if we want these things around, we've got to make a commitment. It doesn't have to be a big commitment, but it has to be a long-term commitment. And I think that is the only way we can save them.
As we look at these pictures of Carl and his kestrels, it's worth reflecting for a moment that if it wasn't for Carl and people like him, where this bird is now, there would just be an empty space forever.